From the beginning of the Second World War, the Great Western Railway played a vital role in the war effort. Under constant threat of aerial attack, the GWR carried troops, evacuees, fuel and munitions across the region. As one of the Luftwaffe's prime targets, every day could bring its drivers and firemen face to face with death, yet they journeyed on regardless of the danger.
If you was chased, well, you do keep going, and there's no point in stopping, unless, of course, you got hit. If they dropped a bomb on you or something like that, well, then no, you automatically was stopped.
I said to the driver, I don't think we're going to come out of this. We both thought we were going to be killed because it was just like hell on earth.
In this film, we tell the story of the sacrifice made by the men and women of the GWR who kept the wheels turning during their finest hour. The mid-1930s, and another new steam engine rolls off the line at the Great Western's locomotive works in Swindon. At the outbreak of war, the GWR employed nearly 9,000 staff and ran a fleet of more than 3,500 locomotives over 9,000 miles of track. It was a vast operation, which would soon find itself at the heart of Britain's battle on the home front. Preparations for war began early, and air raid shelters began to appear on the region's stations. Blackout precautions were introduced, lights were dimmed or removed, and white markings were painted on station platforms to aid visibility. But for the GWR's drivers and firemen, the fitting of anti-glare sheets to their locomotives to prevent light escaping from the firebox made conditions almost unbearable.
It was horrible. On the big engines, you had a top sheet fastened to the tender with springs. You had 2 side sheets and 2 small side sheets. And when all that was down, it was like a furnace, and with the heat of the firebox and all that. Well, you were absolutely inundated with perspiration all the time, like, you know. Those fireboxes threw out tremendous heat, you know, and of course it couldn't escape. It was shut in and you were breathing it, you were in it. It was like a Turkish bath. You could do nothing. You just had to stick it.
Ronald Trust from Newton Abbot was a fireman during the blackout.
You should take your hat off and have a handkerchief and 4-knot it and keep on your head, and it'd soak the sweat off. No lights to be shown anywhere. The only light you had on your engine was a gauge lamp, and that was to show the gauge to see what water you had in your boiler. And other than that, you wasn't allowed to use any lighting.
You were sort of driving blind all the time. You never knew what was on the track.
Fireman Charlie Rutherford knew only too well the dangers of driving in the dark. He was lucky to survive an incident which happened on a night journey in Devon.
We went through Timoth, and when we were getting near Bishopston, the old engine started to rock. Oh, you said there's something wrong with the track here. So, of course, the first box that was open was Hackney Yard box. So we stopped there and told the signalman, and he said, oh, thanks very much. He said, I'll stop off trains, old trains, he said, and out the road examined. And when we went up there was an unexploded bomb. We must have gone over that one. I mean, the chance in a million, that, I mean, he could have gone off.
In the early years of the war, the GWR was involved in 2 major events which required the transportation of passengers en masse. The first was the evacuation of children from London to the relative safety of the West Country. And the second, the movement of the defeated British Expeditionary Force after their miraculous escape from Dunkirk. Fireman Ron Hacker was on duty in June 1940 when the BEF returned.
We had been Bristol to Cheltenham and back. Instead of going home, they said, we got a trooper coming from Eastbourne or somewhere. I can't remember where, to go to Lugger Show. That's next to Tidworth. So we had to go and do that. And they were men that had come out of Dunkirk, and they were in a very sorry state. And when they got out of the trains was full of sand, bayonets, rifles, bandoliers, all equipment just discarded. It was awful, it was. The rifles was full of sand, and they were all collected up and taken away. And the poor devils didn't know they'd left it, I don't think. They were in such a state. That was Dunkirk.
After the fall of Dunkirk, increasing numbers of railway staff were called up to the armed forces. This left the GWR with a shortfall in its labour force, particularly on the engines, and a number of changes were introduced to help ease the problem. The retirement age for drivers was increased, and engine cleaners were promoted from the sheds to the job of firemen more quickly. But it was the employment of women which did most to ease the burden on the railways. 18-year-old Betty Rowland was working in the bookshop at Temple Mead Station in Bristol when she was given the chance to become a guard, a role previously only open to men.
Yeah, I remember well the day they gave me my uniform. We had to go and be fitted out with it. And of course, you have the choice between trousers or skirts. And I never, ever wore trousers before. I just couldn't believe it when I first put on the trousers and the jacket with the whistle hanging on. And the hat, of course, with guard on it. I knew then that I was a guard. And felt very proud about that.
Betty quickly got the hang of the job, although there was one skill she did find a little tricky to master.
I waved the green flag, and the train would start to move, and I would then have to jump onto the train as it was moving, which was quite a feat at first, but I did conquer it and got quite expert at doing it, jumping on after and closing the door behind me, you see.
But it wasn't just staff shortages that the GWR had to overcome. Demands on the country's supply of raw materials soon led to a fuel crisis, and many drivers and firemen faced grueling shifts on the footplate as the quality of coal deteriorated.
We were getting everything that would go in a firebox and burn. Some of the coal was like a lot of black oxo cubes.
Oh, well, we had terrible coal at times. They made these briquettes, like big ones, foot square briquettes, 6 inches deep. You had to break them up for them to burn. And they never burned so good as what the old steam coal was. Then they introduced the little briquettes, like Easter eggs, but a bit bigger. And that there, you can imagine with them, with the rattling of the train going along and all that, to be coming down and you was wasting half of it, it's going out over the sides. It's like pebbles rolling off. But you had all sorts of different coal. Sometimes you had almost a tender full of nothing but dust. Useless it was.
The last 3 jobs I'd done as a fireman was to go to Salop Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, and we had this coal. When I got to Salop, I practically skinned the tender out and he had to be coaled to come back. And they coaled him with this rubbish again. Now I had that 3 nights, and it blooming near killed me. I remember we had a rest day, we was getting rest days then, one day a fortnight. I finished 12:45 on the Thursday morning. I had a rest night Thursday night and I stopped in bed till I come to work Friday evening. I was absolutely beat. That was that cold.
However, it soon became clear that railway workers would have far greater things to worry about when they clocked on at the beginning of their shift: the Luftwaffe. If Hitler could destroy Britain's supply lines, there would be no stopping a German invasion. The 20th of August 1940 was a clear, sunny day in the West Country, and in the small town of Newton Abbot, railway workers went about their daily tasks unaware that German planes loaded with bombs were heading straight for their station. Police officer Ted Trist was walking the beat when the planes arrived.
I was on duty on the corner of Queen Street and Courtney Street, Newton Abbot, when a plane, could only have been 200 feet up, came right over my head and went down Queen Street. Plane banked, and with the same there was one colossal bomb at the bottom of Queen Street. I was one end and this happened, and immediately there came a mushroom from near, as I could estimate, to the railway station, Newton Abbot railway station. Needless to say, dashed on my helmet, dashed down the road, into the railway station, and saw that the train to Plymouth had had a direct hit.
In total, 6 bombs landed on Newton Abbot station that day. Those who were there have never forgotten the scenes of death and destruction that were left behind. On the 20th of August 1940, 3 German planes loaded with bombs flew over the British coastline. Their target, Newton Abbot railway station. 16-year-old engine cleaner Ronald Trust was working at the station as the planes approached.
And we'd have done about 4 hours' work of cleaning different engines that they'd have told us to do. And we'd have broke off now for our break. I was doing this when the whole place blew up. The doors smack bang right open, a hell of a noise, dust, smoke everywhere, and we were in a hurry to get out of the place.
As bombs rained down on the station, policeman Ted Trist rushed to the scene. The passenger train to Plymouth was standing at the platform and had taken a direct hit. Ted climbed onto a carriage to look for survivors.
So I got in the first one I could get a door open with and went through, past 2 or 3 bodies, hopeless, in pieces, some of them were. And I came into a compartment, and there was a man leaning back against the carriage seat, and he moaned. As I approached him, he moaned. So I knew he was alive, and that was a great relief to me. So I moved him. He didn't look as though he was injured in any way, and I looked and examined and gently lifted him forward, and I found that the back of his skull was missing and was oozing brain from his head. I ripped open my first aid bandage and placed it against the injury and laid him gently back against the carriage seat and dashed out to get assistance.
Meanwhile, Ronald Trust had found his way out of the station, just as one of the German planes returned to strafe the area.
You could see him come down here. I did see the marking of one side, what they called the swastika or something like that. And I just dived into the wall that was there, trying to get up as tight as I could, and there was this plane that was coming over, and machine gun right up through Ford Road. He was just slightly over the house levels, like, you know. And with this machine gun going, I thought, oh my God, I've bloody had it here. All this rat-tat-tat-tat, bang, 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 and shrieking. And then the noise of the actual plane as well. It was terrifying, really. And it goes on up and gone, and I'm because he's gone over, and I'm running again.
Back on the platform, Ted Trist was doing all he could for the injured man.
I found an ambulance man, and we came back with a stretcher and loaded him onto it and got him, went through all the debris and the breakage and over the twisted steel and got him out onto the railway platform. The ambulance man then very quickly examined him again and said, he's gone. I felt a terribly frustrated and upset. I felt that I'd done everything that I could and it had been completely and utterly inadequate. And it had such a lasting expression. In fact, possibly one of the most memorable things that happened to me.
In total, 14 people were killed in the raid and over 60 were injured. The station was also badly damaged, and it was essential the tracks were cleared as quickly as possible to ensure the network continued to run.
Catastrophe it was. And that didn't, well, you didn't know where to go or what to do. I went back into our local depot place, and the foreman that was on in there, and he said, "Oh, thank Christ," he said, "one of you have come back." All the rest of the cleaners, they had gone. That didn't come back. And he said, "Here's a list," he said, "for you to go out calling to get the men back in that had been on the early turn, 6 to 2. Get them back in here to help to clear it up." So off I goes now, calling these different blocks and all like that.
As the men arrived at the station and the repair work began, 16-year-old Ronald was at last sent home. Having survived the bombing and strafing, he went to see his girlfriend, where his emotions finally got the better of him.
I could feel myself welling up, and especially when your girlfriend was there, see, I just broke down and cried, Everything was building up, all about it, what had happened.
The bombing of Newton Abbot highlighted the vulnerability of the railways to aerial attack. But it wasn't just stations that were at risk. German dive bombers could easily target moving trains, and reports of attacks were passed on by GWR's drivers and firemen.
You were very apprehensive. You didn't know if anything was going to happen to you or not. You was hoping that it wouldn't.
But carrying freight from Avonmouth to London, Ron Hacker's train did come under attack.
We came out one night at 6:30, all the way up the bank through Enbury and all that, and I think there was about 6 bombs dropped adjacent to the railway all the way up, because we could see the explosion. Whether they could see us or not, we had blackout sheets down. But whether they could see us and was trying for us, I do not know. But you just had to stick it. Where could you go? If you got off the engine, where did you go other than get under the train or something?
Such drastic action was sometimes necessary, however. In the winter of 1941, Charlie Rutherford had just dropped off his passengers on the south coast when the air raid siren sounded. As the Luftwaffe approached, Charlie was instructed to take the train to a nearby tunnel for safety. He got there just as the bombs began to fall.
I'd never been in nothing like it in all my life. The noise, guns, there must have been guns going off, and it was terrible. I said to the driver, I said, "I don't know what you're going to do, but I said, I'm going to lay down under the coach." Took my overcoat and went down in there and laid down. Like that, but you couldn't drown the noise out. Bombs were dropping everywhere. Lots of things were going through my mind. People at home and chaps I'd worked with as a cleaner and that. We both thought we were going to be killed because it was just like hell on earth.
Charlie and his driver spent the entire night terrified in the tunnel, but were soon back at work, determined to carry on whatever the cost. It was this attitude to getting the job done, regardless of the danger, that helped the men and women of the GWR through the darkest days of the war. However, the job was not quite over yet. Before the end of the fighting, the GWR had several vital tasks to carry out. It was involved in the transportation of men and machinery to the south coast as preparations for D-Day began, and in the movement of evacuees from London during the flying bomb attacks. Finally, in 1945, victory in Europe was declared. As the country celebrated, Ron Hacker was hard at work on the railway as usual.
Well, we went 510 Avonmouth, out to Severn Beach, back to Avonmouth, out to Severn Beach, back to Bristol, Bristol to Pilnin to Severn Beach. Then we stood in a siding to let another train go by. We were there a half hour. Bill Ayres was my fireman, and we were sat in the coach, well, thinking about VE Day. And Bill produced a little bottle of whiskey. And we all had our cups there, GWR ones, and we toasted victory in Europe.
The sacrifice made by the men and women of the Great Western Railway during the war was enormous. A total of 68 staff were killed in air raids at work, and a further 241 were injured. But without their efforts, Britain would have ground to a halt. Their courage and determination to get the job done ensured that passengers, raw materials, troops and munitions were carried across the region in the most difficult circumstances. Betty Rowland worked as a guard until the end of the war. She still remembers the personal thanks she received from her inspector when her service came to an end.
He said to me, he shook hands and that, he said, "But it's been a pleasure," he said, "you ladies workers, you've done a very good job indeed." He said, "I know a lot of people thought you might not have been able to do it, but you have done it." He said, "It's been excellent." I felt awful that it's not giving back my uniform, this is the end of it. But very proud that at least I'd done something that had helped the war effort.
Like Ron Hacker and Ronald Trust, Charlie Rutherford continued to work for the GWR until his retirement. His feelings sum up the passion these men and thousands like them had for the railways.
Oh yes, there was a lot of pride in what we were doing. They were a good firm to work for, Great Western. People used to call the GWR God's wonderful railway, and believe me, it was.
Next time we hear from the West Country men who were conscripted to work in the mines as Bevan boys during their finest hour.